Serafina Vale had always known she was unwanted, just never that she could be traded. The realization did not come all at once. It slipped into her bones slowly, like cold water seeping through cracks, until it reached her chest and froze something vital inside her. The grand hall of the Vale estate had never felt so suffocating. It was a room designed to impress. Towering ceilings painted with fading gold, chandeliers that once gleamed like captured starlight, marble floors that echoed every footstep like a verdict. But tonight, the illusion of power had cracks. The gold looked dull, the air felt heavy, and every whispered conversation seemed sharpened with desperation. Serafina stood near the edge of the room, just as she always did, present, but never truly seen. Her emerald dress, chosen not by her but for her, clung to her like a costume she hadn't agreed to wear. It was too elegant for someone her family barely acknowledged, too deliberate to be meaningless. That, more than anything, unsettled her. Across the room, her sister, Ilara, laughed. It was a soft, practiced laugh, the kind that drew attention without begging for it. Their mother stood beside her, hand resting lightly on Ilara's arm, pride evident in every glance. Their father lingered nearby, speaking in low tones of men Serafina did not recognize. No one looked at her. No one ever did. She had spent years convincing herself that invisibility was safer than rejection. But tonight, something felt different. The air carried a tension she couldn't name, like the moment before a storm breaks. And she was standing directly beneath it. "We don't have a choice." The words reached her through the noise, quiet but unmistakable. Serafina turned slightly, her gaze drifting toward her father. He stood near the far archway, his back partially turned, voice low but urgent. The man facing him was unfamiliar, tall, sharply dressed, with an air of stillness that didn't belong to ordinary men. "There's always a choice," the stranger replied. His voice was calm, too calm. Serafina felt something tighten in her chest. Her father exhaled slowly, as if the weight of the world sat squarely on his shoulders. "Not one that keeps my family alive." Alive. The word landed heavier than it should have. Serafina took a small step closer, careful not to draw attention. Years of being overlooked had taught her how to move unnoticed, how to listen without being acknowledged. "The threat is growing," her father continued. "You know that. If we fall, it won't be quiet. It will be public." The stranger said nothing, and somehow that silence was more terrifying than any response. "What you're asking," her father added, voice tightening, "it's not a small price." A pause. Then, "Neither is protection." Serafina's fingers curled slightly at her sides. Protection. The word echoed in her mind, pulling at something fragile. The Vale family had always been powerful, feared, respected, untouchable. Or at least, that's what they wanted the world to believe. But power was a fragile thing, and lately she had felt it slipping. Business losses whispered behind closed doors, increased security, invitations declining, allies growing distant. It had all been happening quietly, like rot beneath polished wood. She just hadn't realized how deep it went. "What exactly do you want?" her father asked. This time, the stranger did not answer immediately. Instead, he shifted slightly, and for the first time, Serafina saw his face clearly. Sharp, composed, unreadable, and his eyes, they moved, not toward her father, toward her. Serafina's breath caught. It wasn't a glance. It was recognition. Deliberate, focused, intent, as if he had known exactly where she stood the entire time, as if he had been waiting for this moment. Her heart stuttered, a strange unease creeping up her spine. Then he spoke. "I want something valuable." The words were simple, but the way he said them made Serafina feel like the ground beneath her had shifted. Her father didn't respond immediately. His jaw tightened, his gaze flickering, just for a second, across the room, following the same line of sight, landing on her. And suddenly, everything made sense. Not all at once, but enough. Enough for the air to leave her lungs. Enough for something inside her to begin breaking. No, her mind rejected it instantly. No, that wasn't possible. Not her. Not like this. She took a step back, shaking her head slightly, as if she could physically dislodge the thought before it settled. Her family wouldn't. Would they? Her mother's voice cut through her spiraling thoughts. Serafina. It was the first time that evening her name had been spoken, and it didn't sound like affection. It sounded like a summons. Every instinct told her to run, but she didn't, because she had spent her entire life learning that resistance only made things worse. Slowly she turned. Her mother stood at the center of the room now, all conversations fading into silence as attention shifted. Ilera was no longer smiling. Their father had joined them, his expression carved from something hard and unyielding. The stranger stood just behind him, watching, always watching. "Come here," her mother said. Serafina's feet felt heavy, like they no longer belonged to her. But she moved anyway, each step echoing too loudly against the marble floor. The room felt smaller with every second, colder. As she approached, she searched their faces, desperately, foolishly for something. Regret, hesitation, anything that might prove she was wrong. She found nothing, only decision, only finality. "You understand the situation we're in," her father said. It wasn't a question. Serafina swallowed. "No," she said quietly. "I don't." A flicker of irritation crossed his face. "You don't need to understand everything," her mother added smoothly. "You only need to do what is required." Required. The word cut deeper than it should have. Serafina's gaze shifted to Ilera, searching for something. Anything, but her sister looked away. Just like always. Something inside Serafina cracked. Not loudly, not dramatically. Just enough. "What are you asking me to do?" she asked. Her voice was steady. That surprised her. Her father didn't hesitate this time. "We've made an arrangement." The world seemed to tilt slightly. "An arrangement," she repeated. "Yes." "With him?" she asked, her eyes flicking briefly toward the stranger. Her father nodded once. Cold, final. "And what exactly does this arrangement involve?" Silence. For a moment, no one spoke. And in that silence, Serafina realized something terrifying. They were waiting for her to understand on her own, waiting for her to accept it without forcing them to say it, because saying it would make it real, because saying it would make them responsible. Her chest tightened. "No," she whispered. Her mother's expression hardened slightly. "Serafina." "No," she said again, louder this time. "You're not, this isn't. It's done." Her father's voice cut through her words like a blade. Final, unyielding, irrevocable. Serafina stared at him, at the man who had never truly been her father, not in the ways that mattered. But still, "You're giving me away," she said. Not a question, a realization. No one denied it. No one corrected her. And that silence was louder than any confession. Her breath hitched. A strange, hollow feeling spread through her chest, like something vital had just been removed. "I'm your daughter," she said. The words felt fragile, breakable. Her father's expression didn't change. "You are what this family needs you to be." Something inside her shattered completely. Not loudly, not visibly, but irreparably. For a brief, fleeting moment, she considered fighting, screaming, running, begging. But then she looked at them again, at her mother's composure, at her father's indifference, at her sister's silence. And she understood something that hurt more than the betrayal itself. This had been decided long before tonight. She had never had a choice. She had never even been considered. She wasn't losing her family. She had never had one. A quiet calm settled over her. Not peace. Never peace. Just acceptance. The absence of expectation. "All right," she said softly. The word surprised even her. Her mother blinked slightly, as if she hadn't expected compliance so easily. But Serafina wasn't agreeing. She was letting go of them, of everything. Without another word, she turned, not toward her family, but toward him, the man who had just acquired her life, like it was a transaction. Up close, he was even more unsettling. Not because he looked cruel, but because he didn't. There was no visible malice, no overt threat, just control. Absolute, effortless control. And those eyes, they didn't look at her like she was a stranger. They looked at her like she was already his. Serafina stopped in front of him, lifting her chin slightly despite the tremor in her chest. "Do I get to know your name?" she asked. A flicker of something, amusement, perhaps, touched his expression. "Names can wait," he said. His voice was low, measured, dangerous in a way she couldn't fully explain. Her fingers curled slightly at her sides. "Then what do I call you?" He stepped closer, not enough to touch, but enough to invade her space, enough to make the air feel thinner. "You won't need to call me anything," he said quietly. A pause. Then, "You'll only need to listen." A chill ran down her spine. And in that moment, standing between the family that had discarded her and the man who now claimed her, Serafina realized something far more terrifying than betrayal. She hadn't been saved from destruction. She had been handed directly into something far worse. And as his gaze locked onto hers, unwavering and absolute, one thought echoed louder than all the others. She hadn't just lost her freedom. She had just been claimed by a man who never intended to give it back. Dante Moretti had built an empire on one unbreakable rule. He never repeated a deal. Not in business. Not in war. And certainly not in matters that involved human lives. To him, repetition meant hesitation, weakness, sentiment. And Dante Moretti had never allowed himself the luxury of any of those things. Men whispered his name like a warning. Entire families reshaped their loyalties just to avoid crossing his path. His empire didn't expand. It consumed. Quietly, efficiently, permanently. He did not negotiate twice. He did not forgive mistakes. And he never, under any circumstance, kept anything he didn't need. That was what made the moment unfolding before him wrong. Not visibly, not obviously, but unmistakably. Serafina Vale stood in front of him, still, silent, composed in a way that didn't match the circumstances of her surrender. Most people, when handed over like currency, broke. They cried, they begged, they fought. She didn't, and that alone was enough to make Dante pause. Not outwardly, not in a way anyone else would notice. But inside, something shifted just slightly, enough. His men noticed. Of course they did. They always noticed everything. Luca, standing just behind his right shoulder, had already picked up on the irregularity. Dante could feel it without turning. The subtle tension, the alertness sharpening. Because Dante Moretti did not hesitate. Ever. And yet, he hadn't spoken. The room waited. The Vale family stood rigid, their desperation now disguised as formal composure. They had expected this moment to conclude quickly, cleanly, an exchange, a transaction, an ending. But Dante wasn't moving. His gaze remained fixed on Serafina, dark and unreadable, assessing, calculating, claiming. It was not desire. It was not interest. It was something far more dangerous. Recognition without reason. And Dante did not believe in coincidences. She is the agreement. Her father's voice broke the silence, firm but edged with something fragile beneath it. Dante didn't look at him, didn't acknowledge him, as if the man had already ceased to matter. Instead, he took one slow step forward. Serafina didn't retreat. That, too, registered. Interesting. Most would have flinched. Most would have lowered their gaze. She didn't. Her chin remained slightly lifted, her expression calm, not because she wasn't afraid, but because she had already accepted something far worse than fear. Dante could see it, and it intrigued him. "What is your name?" he asked. The question landed like a disruption. Luca stiffened slightly behind him. That wasn't part of the process. Names didn't matter. Not in deals like this. Serafina held his gaze. Serafina Vale. Her voice didn't shake. Another anomaly. Dante's eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly. Vale, of course. A declining house. Desperate enough to bargain with something they couldn't afford to lose. He already knew the details. He always did. But information and reality were not the same. And reality was standing in front of him. "You understand why you're here?" he asked. A test, not for knowledge, for reaction. A pause. Then, yes. One word. No hesitation. No denial. No plea. Dante studied her more carefully now. There was again that absence, not obedience, not submission. Something else, something quieter, colder, she's been informed. Her mother interjected quickly, as if trying to regain control of the situation. Dante ignored her completely. She's valuable, her father added, his voice tightening slightly. Educated, presentable, she will serve her purpose. Serve, the word lingered in the air. Dante's gaze shifted, finally, toward him, and for the first time, there was something unmistakable in his expression. Disapproval, not loud, not aggressive, but absolute. I didn't ask what she could do, Dante said quietly. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Lucas shifted again. This was wrong. All of it. Dante never deviated from structure. He never let emotion, or anything resembling it, interfere. But this was deviation. And deviation was dangerous. Serafina felt it too. The shift. Subtle, but undeniable. The power in the room wasn't where it had been moments ago. It wasn't with her family anymore. It wasn't even evenly distributed. It had concentrated, entirely, around him. Dante took another step closer. Now, there was no distance left to pretend. You're very calm, he said. It wasn't praise. It was observation. Serafina exhaled slowly. If I wasn't, she said quietly, it wouldn't change anything. Silence. Then, a flicker, not visible to most. But Lucas saw it. So did the others. Interest. Dante Moretti was interested. That had never ended well for anyone. Most people, Dante said, his voice lowering slightly, would try to bargain. I have nothing to bargain with, she replied. Another pause. Then, that's not true. The words were soft, measured, and far too deliberate. Serafina's breath caught just slightly. Dante saw it. He stepped even closer now, close enough that the rest of the room blurred into irrelevance. You just don't know what you have yet. The statement settled between them like a threat or a promise, or both. Behind them, her father shifted. This arrangement. Dante raised a hand, not forcefully, not dramatically, but the effect was immediate. Silence. Total. Complete. He didn't even look at the man as he spoke. You've said enough. Control. Effortless. Absolute. Serafina felt it then, not just his power, but the way he wielded it. Not loudly, not carelessly, but with precision, like everything else in his world. Dante's attention returned to her, still fixed, still unrelenting. You were offered as a solution, he said. She didn't respond. You were accepted as a transaction. Her fingers tightened slightly at her sides. And yet, he paused, just long enough for the entire room to feel it. I don't see a transaction. The words hit harder than anything before, because they weren't rejection. They were something far more destabilizing. Uncertainty. Lucas stepped forward slightly. Dante, not now. 2 words. Enough to stop him completely. Serafina's pulse quickened. This wasn't going the way it was supposed to. She didn't know what was supposed to happen. But this wasn't it. Dante turned slightly, his gaze sweeping across the Vale family. Assessing, reevaluating, discarding. You came to me for protection, he said. Her father nodded quickly. Yes. You offered something in return. Yes. Dante tilted his head slightly. And you assumed I would accept it without question. A flicker of unease crossed her father's face. It's a fair exchange. Dante's expression didn't change. No, he said calmly. It's not. The words landed like a fracture through glass. Clean, sharp, irreversible. Confusion rippled through the room. This wasn't how it worked. This wasn't how he worked. Dante Moretti didn't refuse completed deals. He didn't reconsider. He didn't pause. But now, he was... Serafina felt something unfamiliar stir in her chest. Not hope, never hope, but something just as dangerous. Possibility. Dante looked at her again, and this time there was no mistaking it. Possession, not because the deal had been made, but because he was choosing it, on his terms, in his way. You don't belong in a bargain, he said quietly. Her breath caught. The room froze. And for the first time since this began, Serafina didn't feel like something being given away. She felt like something being chosen, and that was far more dangerous. Lucas stepped closer again, his voice low, controlled. If you don't finalize this, we walk away. Dante didn't look at him, didn't respond immediately, because for the first time in years, he was considering something he couldn't calculate, something he couldn't control, something that didn't fit into rules or systems or outcomes. His gaze never left Serafina, and when he finally spoke, his voice was quieter than before, but far more decisive. I don't want to deal. Silence. Shock. Disbelief. Her father stepped forward. You said, I know what I said. Dante's tone didn't rise. It didn't need to. Everything in the room bent around it anyway. Serafina's heart pounded now, not from fear, but from the sudden, terrifying shift in direction. If not the deal, then what? Dante took one final step closer, close enough that there was no space left between decision and consequence. His voice dropped, low enough that only she could hear it. I don't take what's offered, he said. A pause. His gaze locked onto hers. Unrelenting, absolute. I take what I choose. And in that moment, Serafina understood something that sent a deeper chill through her than betrayal ever had. This wasn't escape. This wasn't freedom. This was something far worse than being sold. Because now, she wasn't part of the transaction anymore. She was a decision. And Dante Moretti had just broken his own rule. Because for the first time, he didn't want control of the deal. He wanted control of her. The room did not recover from Dante Moretti's refusal. It fractured, not loudly, not chaotically, but in a way that was far more unsettling. Like something invisible had shifted, something no one could put back into place. Because men like Dante did not change their minds. They enforced them. And yet, here he stood, dismantling a deal that should have already been sealed. Serafina felt it before she understood it. The shift, the quiet unraveling of everything she thought this moment was supposed to be. This wasn't about protection anymore. It never had been. Dante stepped back slightly, not retreating, but creating space. Not distance from her, but distance from the illusion of the deal itself. His expression had returned to its usual stillness. Controlled, unreadable, but something beneath it had changed. Something far more dangerous than dominance. Conflict. Luca moved closer again, his voice low but edged now. This isn't like you. Dante didn't respond immediately, because Luca was right. This wasn't like him. Not even close. Dante Moretti had built his empire on clarity. Every move calculated. Every outcome anticipated. Every decision made before anyone else even realized there was a decision to make. But this had not been planned. And that was exactly what made it unacceptable. His gaze shifted briefly, not to Serafina, but past her, to the man who had brought her into this room, her father, a man Dante had already judged, already categorized, already dismissed. But now he was reconsidering. Not the man, the history. Tell me something, Dante said quietly. The room stilled again. Her father straightened slightly, cautious. What? Dante's voice didn't change. When you decided to offer her, was it desperation? A pause. Or guilt? The question landed like a blade slipped between ribs. Clean, precise, unexpected. Serafina felt it more than she understood it. Guilt? Her father's expression hardened instantly. This is a business decision. Dante's gaze sharpened. No, he said softly. It's not. And for the first time, there was tension in him, not visible to most, but unmistakable. Because Dante wasn't asking for information. He was confirming something. Something he already suspected. Serafina's pulse began to quicken again. Not from fear this time, but from something far more disorienting. Confusion. Because the way he was looking at her now, it wasn't like before. It wasn't just possession. It was recognition layered with something else. Something heavier. Older. As if she wasn't new to him. As if she never had been. That's enough, her father said sharply. We had terms. Dante ignored him. Again. Completely. Instead, he turned back to Serafina, and for the first time since she'd been brought into this, his voice changed. Not softer, not kinder, but more precise. "What do you know about your family?" he asked. The question caught her off guard. She blinked slightly. "What?" "Your family," he repeated. "Before this house. Before the name Vale meant anything." Her brows pulled together slightly. "Nothing," she said. "There's nothing to know." A lie, not intentional, but still a lie, because Serafina had always felt it. The gaps, the things no one explained, the way certain topics disappeared the moment she entered a room, the way her presence shifted conversations instead of joining them. Dante saw it in her expression, the realization forming. Slow, uncertain, but inevitable. "Of course you don't," he murmured, more to himself than anyone else. Luca stepped forward again, quieter this time. "Dante, what is this?" Dante didn't answer him, because answering would mean exposing something he had kept buried for years. Something irrelevant, something unnecessary, something that shouldn't matter. And yet, it did. His gaze returned to her. Steady, unavoidable. "Do you know what your father was before he became this?" Dante asked. Serafina's throat tightened slightly. "No." Her father cut in sharply. "That has nothing to do with this arrangement." Dante's eyes flicked toward him again. Cold, decisive. "It has everything to do with it." The room seemed to constrict. Tension pulled tighter, sharper. Because now, this wasn't about a deal. This was about something buried. Something dangerous. Serafina felt it fully now. The shift from physical threat to something far more complex, more suffocating. Because physical danger had rules. This didn't. Dante stepped closer again, but this time not to dominate, to observe, to confirm. "You were never meant to be part of this world," he said quietly. Her breath caught. The words didn't sound like accusation. They sounded like fact. "But you are," he continued, "whether you understand it or not." Serafina's chest tightened. "What does that mean?" Dante studied her for a long moment. Long enough that the silence became unbearable. Then, "It means," he said slowly, "this was never about protection." Her pulse spiked. Behind her, she heard her mother shift slightly. Her father didn't move at all. Too still, too controlled, as if holding something back. "What are you talking about?" Serafina asked. Dante's gaze didn't waver. "You weren't offered because you were expendable," he said. The words hit harder than they should have. Because part of her had believed that, accepted it. "You were offered," he continued, "because you were known." Silence. Sharp. Absolute. Serafina felt the ground tilt beneath her again. "Known how?" Dante didn't answer immediately. Because this was a line. The moment where something buried either stayed buried or surfaced. And Dante Moretti had never hesitated to dig up the past when it served him. The problem was, this didn't feel like strategy. It felt like inevitability. Luca's voice came again, more urgent now. "Dante, if there's something we need to know..." "There isn't," Dante cut in, but his tone said otherwise. Serafina's heart pounded now. Louder. Faster. "Why me?" she asked. The question slipped out before she could stop it. Raw. Unfiltered. Real. And for the first time, Dante didn't have an immediate answer. Not one he could give. Because the truth wasn't clean. It wasn't simple. And it wasn't something that fit into the rules he had built his entire life around. His jaw tightened slightly. Barely noticeable. But enough. Enough for Luca to see. Enough for Serafina to feel. And in that small, rare fracture, she understood something that shifted everything again. He didn't just want her. He needed something connected to her. Something deeper than a deal. Something older than tonight. Dante exhaled slowly. Then finally, "You were part of a story that ended badly," he said. Her breath hitched. "I don't understand." "No," he said quietly. "You wouldn't." Because she had been kept away from it. Protected from it. Or perhaps hidden from it. Her father stepped forward now, his composure cracking for the first time. "That's enough." Dante didn't even look at him. "Is it?" he asked softly. The question wasn't directed at him. It was directed at the truth itself, at how long it had been buried, at how long it had waited. Serafina's chest felt tight now. Too tight. "Someone tell me what's happening," she said, her voice no longer steady. But no one answered her. Not her family. Not his men. Only Dante. And even he didn't give her everything. Just enough. Just enough to pull her deeper. "You think you were traded tonight," he said. Her pulse thundered. "You weren't." A pause. His eyes locked onto hers, dark, unwavering, inescapable. "You were returned." The word shattered something invisible in the room. Returned. Not given. Not sold. Not sacrificed. Returned. Serafina felt it like a crack through her entire understanding of herself. "That's not possible," she whispered. But even as she said it, something inside her resisted the denial, because deep down, somewhere she had never been able to reach, there had always been something missing, something unspoken, something that didn't belong. Dante saw it in her eyes. That moment, that fracture, and it confirmed everything. His voice dropped lower, quieter, but far more dangerous. "You were chosen long before this deal," he said. Her breath caught completely now. The room disappeared. The noise faded. Everything narrowed to just that sentence, that truth, that impossible, terrifying truth. And as it settled into her chest, heavy and undeniable, one realization rose above all the others. This wasn't the beginning of her story. It was a continuation of something she had never been allowed to remember. And the most dangerous part, Dante Moretti had been waiting for her long before she ever knew his name. Serafina Vale was no longer treated like a transaction, but she wasn't treated like a guest either. She existed somewhere in between, untouchable yet watched, isolated yet never alone, present yet somehow placed beyond reach. And that, more than anything, unsettled everyone, including her. The transition hadn't been announced. There were no formal orders spoken in front of her, no visible shift in structure or protocol. But the change was immediate and absolute. No one touched her, not even by accident, not even in passing. Doors were opened before she reached them. Space cleared without words. Conversation stopped the moment she entered a room, not out of dismissal, but out of something far more calculated. Awareness, caution, restraint. It didn't take long for her to understand why. Dante Moretti had given an order, and in his world, orders were not questioned. They were obeyed. Completely, she's off limits. That was all he had said. No explanation. No justification. Just a rule. And like every rule that came from him, it became law. Serafina noticed it in the smallest ways. A man stepping back too quickly when she turned a corner. Another lowering his gaze the moment she looked in his direction. Even Luca, who carried authority just beneath Dante himself, kept a careful, deliberate distance. It wasn't fear of her. It was fear of what would happen if they forgot what she had become. Untouchable, not because she was fragile, but because she was his. That realization should have terrified her. And it did, at first. But fear, she was beginning to understand, was not a fixed thing. It evolved, shifted, changed shape. Because the longer she remained within Dante's world, the more she began to notice something that didn't align with the narrative she had built in her mind. He didn't treat her like something he owned. He treated her like something he was restraining himself from claiming. And that difference, it mattered more than she wanted it to. Days passed, though time felt different here. Less defined, less structured. The outside world had become distant, irrelevant, like something she had already outgrown without realizing it. She wasn't locked in a room. She wasn't confined. But she wasn't free either, because freedom required choice. And she still had none. What she did have was observation. And Serafina had always been good at that. It was how she had survived her family, how she had learned to read silence, interpret absence, understand what people didn't say rather than what they did. So she watched. She watched the way Dante moved through his world, the way people reacted before he even spoke, the way decisions seemed to form around him without needing explanation. He was not loud, Not aggressive in the way she had expected. He didn't raise his voice, didn't demand attention. And yet, everything bent around him. Control, she realized, wasn't something he enforced. It was something he was. That understanding should have solidified her fear. Instead, it complicated it. Because control like that didn't come from chaos. It came from discipline, from restraint, from something far more dangerous than cruelty. Precision. And Dante Moretti was precise in everything, including her. He didn't seek her out. Not often. But when he did, the air changed. Always. Their interactions were brief, measured, never unnecessary. And yet, they carried a weight she couldn't ignore. You're adjusting. It wasn't a question. He stood near the window. The city stretched out behind him like something he had already conquered. He didn't look at her immediately when he spoke. He didn't need to. Serafina stood across the room, still learning how to exist in a space where she wasn't invisible, but also wasn't fully acknowledged. I don't have a choice, she replied. A familiar answer. But something about it felt different now. Dante turned slightly, his gaze finding hers. There's always a choice. The words echoed something he had said before. But this time, they didn't feel like a challenge. They felt like a test. Serafina held his gaze. Then what exactly is mine? A pause. Not long, but long enough. Dante studied her carefully. And for a moment, just a moment, something broke through his usual composure. Not weakness, not softness, but conflict. Real, unfiltered, dangerous. Not being broken, he said quietly. The words settled into the space between them. Heavy, unavoidable. Serafina's breath caught slightly, because that was not what she expected. Not from him, not from anyone. Why? She asked. Simple, direct, and far more dangerous than it sounded, because she wasn't asking about rules anymore. She was asking about him. Dante's expression hardened slightly, not in anger, in defense. That's not your concern. But it was. She could feel it, in the way he kept his distance, in the way he watched her when he thought she wasn't looking, in the way no one else was allowed to come close. This wasn't strategy anymore. This was something else. Something he hadn't intended. Something he wasn't fully controlling. And that was the most dangerous thing of all. You said I was returned, she said slowly. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. You did. Then returned to what? Silence. Not empty, not passive, but filled with something unspoken. Something he was choosing not to give her. And that choice, it told her everything she needed to know. There was a truth here, a real one, and it wasn't simple. It wasn't clean. It wasn't something she was meant to understand yet. Dante stepped back slightly, creating distance again, rebuilding control. This isn't a conversation you're ready for, he said. Her chest tightened. Or one you don't want to have? His gaze snapped back to hers. Sharp, immediate, and for a second, too intense, because she had touched something. Something real, something buried, something he did not like being seen. The air between them shifted again. Tighter, closer, more dangerous. You're observant, he said. Not praise, recognition. Serafina didn't respond, because she understood what that meant. He had noticed her noticing, and in his world, that mattered a lot. But instead of shutting her down, he stepped closer. Just once, just enough. You should be careful what you start to understand, he said quietly. A warning, clear, unavoidable, but not threatening. Not exactly, because beneath it, there was something else. Something she couldn't quite name yet. Something that made her pulse shift in a way that had nothing to do with fear, and everything to do with awareness. Dante wasn't protecting her because he had to. He was protecting her because he wanted to. And that changed everything, because want was unpredictable. And men like Dante Moretti did not allow themselves unpredictability, which meant this wouldn't stay contained for long. And the moment it broke, it wouldn't just affect him. It would destroy everything around him, including her. Somewhere beyond the walls of his empire, movement had already begun. Quiet, calculated, watching. Waiting, because power like Dante's didn't exist without enemies. And enemies paid attention to changes, even the smallest ones. She's important. The words were spoken in a dimly lit room far from where Serafina stood, not as speculation, as confirmation. A man leaned forward, fingers steepled, eyes sharp with interest. Moretti doesn't protect anything without reason. Another voice, quieter, more cautious. We don't know what she is. A slight smile. Cold. Deliberate. We don't need to. A pause. Then, we just need to know what she means to him. Silence followed. Heavy. Understanding settling into place. Because in a world built on power, there was only one true weakness. Not emotion. Not loyalty. But attachment. And Dante Moretti, for the first time, had shown one. The decision was made without hesitation. Clean, efficient, final. Find her. A pause. Then take her. And somewhere far from where she stood, unknowingly protected. Serafina Vale had just become the most dangerous target in a war she didn't even know had already begun. By the time the first attempt to reach her failed, Dante Moretti already knew something was wrong. Not because of the attack itself, but because of its timing. Nothing in his world happened without reason. Not movements, not alliances, not risks. And whoever had decided to reach for Serafina had done so with certainty. Not curiosity, not desperation. Certainty, which meant one thing: they knew something. And if they knew, then the truth had already begun to surface. Dante stood in the center of the room, the faint glow of city lights stretching behind him like a silent empire waiting for command. Lucas stood across from him, a file in his hand. Thicker than it should have been. Too thick for a simple background check. Too detailed for coincidence. This isn't just about her, Lucas said quietly. Dante didn't respond, because he already understood that. He had from the moment he saw her. He just hadn't wanted to confirm it. Her family history doesn't align, Luca continued. There are gaps, entire years that don't exist in records, name changes that don't match legal transitions, financial movements that were buried intentionally. Dante's gaze darkened slightly. Who buried them? Luca hesitated. That's the problem, he said. It wasn't one person. A pause. It was coordinated. The words settled heavily in the room. Coordinated meant planning. Planning meant intent. And intent meant this had never been random. Dante's jaw tightened. Start from the beginning, he said. Luca nodded, opening the file. Serafina Vale was not born into the Vale name, he said. She was placed into it. Silence. Sharp. Controlled. But dangerous. Dante didn't move. Didn't react. But something inside him shifted. Violently. Place how? He asked. Adopted. Luca said. Officially. Quietly. Without public record. Only internal documentation. Dante's eyes narrowed. When? Luca exhaled slowly. 18 years ago. That number hit harder than it should have, because it aligned too precisely, too perfectly, with something Dante had spent years burying. Continue, he said. Luca flipped a page. There was an incident, he said carefully, a conflict between two factions. It never made it into official records. It was erased. Dante's voice dropped lower. I remember it. Of course he did. He remembered everything, especially the things that had been taken from him. Luca's gaze lifted slightly. Then you know what was lost. Dante didn't answer, because what had been lost had never been recovered. Until now. Luca placed a file on the table between them. There was a child, he said. The words echoed louder than they should have. Dante's gaze dropped slowly to the file, not reading it, not yet, because he didn't need to. He already knew, or at least, he was starting to. That child disappeared the same night, Luca continued. No body, no confirmation, just gone. Silence. Then, until she reappeared. Dante's voice was quieter now, more controlled, but far more dangerous. Luca nodded once. As Serafina Vale. The room seemed to constrict. Tighter, colder, heavier. because this wasn't coincidence. This was design. And Dante Moretti did not tolerate being manipulated, ever. Meanwhile, Serafina stood alone, but for the first time since arriving, it wasn't the silence that consumed her. It was the questions. They had been building slowly, piece by piece, each moment with Dante, each shift in behavior, each unanswered truth pressing against her understanding of herself. And now, they were too loud to ignore. You were returned. His words echoed again, over and over. Relentless, unavoidable. Return to what? Return from where? Return to who? Her hands trembled slightly as she pressed them against the edge of the table in front of her. This wasn't just about her family anymore. It wasn't even about Dante. This was about something deeper, something she had never been allowed to see. And the more she thought about it, the more something inside her resisted, not in denial, in recognition, like a memory she couldn't access, like a truth her mind had been trained to reject. I need answers. The words left her before she could stop them, and this time, she didn't say them quietly. She didn't hide them. She didn't swallow them, because something inside her had already begun to break, not from fear, but from realization. She wasn't just a victim of the situation. She was at the center of it. Dante entered the room moments later, and the moment he did, she knew, not the full truth. Not yet, but enough. Enough to see it in his eyes. Enough to feel the shift. Something had changed. Not in the world. In him. You knew, she said. No hesitation. No softness. Just truth cutting straight through everything else. Dante didn't deny it. Didn't confirm it either. But his silence, it was enough. Her chest tightened. How long? She asked. A pause. Then, long enough. The answer shattered something fragile inside her. Because it wasn't just about what he knew. It was about what everyone else had hidden. Her breath came uneven now. My family. She couldn't finish the sentence. Didn't need to, because the answer was already there. Waiting. Heavy. Unforgiving. They didn't trade you to survive, Dante said quietly. Her eyes snapped to his. Every part of her bracing. Every part of her already knowing. They traded you, he continued, to make sure this never came back to them. The words landed like a collapse. Complete. Irreversible. Serafina staggered back slightly, her hand gripping the edge of the table harder now. No, she whispered, but the denial lacked strength, because it fit too well, too perfectly. Every moment of distance, every silence, every look that had passed over her instead of landing on her. They knew, she said, her voice breaking. They always knew. Dante didn't answer, because she was right, and the truth didn't need confirmation. Tears burned in her eyes, but she didn't let them fall. Not yet. Then what am I? She asked. The question wasn't desperate. It was raw, demanding, because she deserved to know. Dante held her gaze, and for the first time, there was no distance between truth and consequence. You're the missing piece of a war that never ended, he said. Her breath caught sharply. A war they buried, he added. Silence. Then, and a truth they were willing to sacrifice you to keep hidden. That was it. That was the moment, the breaking point. Not loud, not dramatic, but final. Serafina laughed, soft, unstable, disbelieving. Of course, she whispered. Of course they would. Her hands dropped slowly to her sides. Her entire body felt too light, too empty, like everything she had ever believed had just been stripped away. I wasn't unwanted, she said. A pause. Her voice cracked. I was inconvenient. The realization hurt more than betrayal, because betrayal required love first. This was something else. Something colder. Something far more calculated. Dante watched her carefully, not stepping closer, not interfering, because this was not something he could control. And for the first time in years, he hated that. They erased me, she said quietly. Yes. They hid me. Yes. They gave me away. Her voice broke again. To finish it, Dante didn't respond immediately, because there was only one truth left. and it was the one that mattered most. They gave you to me, he said slowly, because they thought I wouldn't recognize what you are. Her eyes lifted to his, sharp, searching. And what am I? She asked. Dante's expression hardened, not against her, against everything that had led to this moment. Your leverage, he said. A pause. Then, your history. Another. And you're the one thing that can bring everything down. The room felt smaller, colder, more dangerous. Because now, this wasn't personal anymore. This was power. This was territory. This was war. Serafina exhaled slowly, and for the first time, she understood something completely. There had never been a place where she was safe. Not with her family. Not here. Not anywhere. Because her existence itself was a threat, and threats were eliminated unless they were controlled. Dante stepped closer now, not to dominate, not to claim, but because distance no longer made sense. This wasn't a deal, he said quietly. Her gaze locked onto his. No, she replied. A beat. It was a setup. His eyes darkened, because now he saw it too. Fully, clearly, dangerously. Someone had orchestrated this. Someone had moved pieces into place. Someone had used both of them. And Dante Moretti did not tolerate being used. Ever. But this was bigger than retaliation. This was something that could fracture everything. Because if the truth came out, it wouldn't just destroy her family. It wouldn't just destabilize his enemies. It would do something far worse. It would shake the foundation of his own empire. Serafina felt it too. The weight, the inevitability, the danger. Her voice was barely above a whisper when she spoke. If people find out... Dante didn't let her finish. They will, he said. Not if, when, because secrets like this didn't stay buried. Not forever. And now, it was already too late. Serafina closed her eyes for a brief moment, and when she opened them, there was no fear left, only clarity. Then everything ends, she said. Dante held her gaze, and for the first time, there was no control in his expression, only truth. Yes. A pause. Heavy, final, and then the realization that changed everything settled fully into place. Her existence wasn't just dangerous. It was catastrophic, because the truth about her wouldn't just destroy one side. It would collapse both, and as the silence thickened between them, one reality became impossible to ignore. Serafina Vale wasn't the victim of the story anymore. She was the reason it could all fall apart. Because I needed to. Control had always been Dante Moretti's greatest strength. It was the foundation of everything he built. His empire's reputation, his survival, control over decisions, over outcomes, over people. Most importantly, control over himself. But control, Dante had learned long ago, only worked when nothing mattered enough to disrupt it. And Serafina Vale was becoming exactly that disruption. It didn't happen suddenly. Obsession never did. It began quietly, subtly, in ways that could still be explained as strategy. Security around her increased first, not visibly, not in a way that would alert her, but enough that every corridor she walked was already cleared, every room she entered already checked. Men rotated more frequently. Surveillance tightened. Information about movements became restricted, not because she had asked for protection, because Dante had decided she needed it. At first, it made sense. She was a target now, a liability, a variable in a much larger equation. But then, it didn't stop. Even when the threat subsided temporarily, even when there was no immediate danger, even when logic suggested it should ease, it didn't, because it wasn't about strategy anymore. It was about certainty. And Dante no longer trusted anything that involved her safety to chance. That was the first fracture. The second was him. Serafina noticed it before anyone else did, not because she understood him, but because she had started paying attention in a way she hadn't allowed herself to before. At first, it was small, the way he appeared without warning. Not often, but enough. Always at the right moment. Always just as something shifted, as if he had anticipated it, or needed to. Then it became something else. He lingered, not physically, not in ways that would make it obvious, but in presence, in awareness, in the way his attention found her, even when he was engaged in something else. He didn't speak more, didn't soften, didn't change in ways that would be easy to define. But he watched, and that watching, it wasn't distant anymore. It was focused, intentional, possessive, and Serafina felt it, not as fear, not entirely, but as something far more complicated, because alongside the fear, something else had begun to grow. Awareness, not of danger, of him, and that awareness, it changed everything. "You're not sleeping." The voice came from behind her, low, controlled, familiar. Serafina didn't turn immediately. She stood by the window, the darkness outside stretching endlessly, mirroring the quiet storm building inside her. "I didn't realize I was monitored," she said softly. A pause. Then, "It isn't." Dante stepped closer. Not too close. Never too close. But close enough that his presence shifted the air around her. "Then how do you know?" she asked. Silence lingered for a moment. Then, "Because I notice." The answer was simple. But it wasn't. Because men like Dante didn't notice things like that. Not unless it mattered. Serafina turned slowly. Her gaze met his. Steady, searching. "Why?" she asked. Not accusing, not defensive, just real. And that made it dangerous. Because real questions demanded real answers. And Dante, he didn't have one he was willing to give. "Because it affects your judgment," he said instead. A controlled answer. A safe one. A lie wrapped in logic. Serafina held his gaze a second longer, then nodded slightly, accepting it, not because she believed it, but because she understood something he didn't say. He wasn't ready to admit the truth, not even to himself. That realization settled into her quietly, and it shifted something inside her, because the man who controlled everything was starting to lose control where she was concerned, and he didn't even realize how far it had gone. Meanwhile, the world outside wasn't waiting. Information moved quickly, faster than loyalty, faster than caution, faster than control. She's no longer just important. The voice was colder this time, sharper, certain. She's essential. The room was darker than before. More people now. More interest. More risk. A photograph slid across the table. Grainy, distant, but clear enough. Serafina, standing beside Dante, not as a prisoner, not as a transaction, but as something far more dangerous. Protected. A man leaned back slightly, studying the image. "That changes things." "Yes," another replied. "It means we don't target his empire." A pause. Then, "We target her." Silence followed. Not hesitation. Agreement. Because this was the fastest way to break something unbreakable. Not by attacking strength, but by exploiting the one thing that had become vulnerable. And Dante Moretti, for the first time, had won, back inside his world. Serafina felt it before she understood it. The shift, subtle, but present. The air felt tighter. The movements around her more precise, more controlled, more alert. Something had changed. And this time, it wasn't just about her. It was about him. "You increase security again," she said quietly. Dante didn't deny it. "Yes." "Why?" A pause. Then, "Because I needed to." Needed. Not decided. Not calculated. Needed. The word lingered between them. Heavy. Unfamiliar. Serafina's chest tightened slightly. Because that wasn't strategy. That was instinct. And instinct was dangerous. "You're not answering the question," she said. Dante's gaze held hers. Unwavering. "I am." She shook her head slightly. "No," she said softly. "You're avoiding it." A flicker of something crossed his expression. Not anger. Not irritation. Something sharper. More exposed. "You're becoming a risk," he said. There it was. The truth. Or part of it. Serafina exhaled slowly. "I always was." "Yes." A pause. "But now it's different." Her pulse shifted. "How?" Dante didn't answer immediately, because the truth was not something he could say without changing everything. "You're no longer just a threat to others," he said finally. Her breath caught slightly. "You're a threat to me." Silence. Absolute. Because those words, they weren't strategic. They weren't calculated. They were real. And reality was something Dante Moretti rarely allowed into his decisions. Serafina felt it settle deep in her chest. Not fear, not safety, something in between, something dangerous. Because if she was a threat to him, and he still refused to let her go, then this was no longer about control. It was about something far more unstable, something far more irreversible. Dante stepped closer, closer than before, closer than he should have. And for the first time, he didn't correct it, didn't step back, didn't reestablish distance. "You should be afraid of that," he said quietly. Serafina looked up at him, and for the first time, she wasn't. "I think you are," she replied. The words landed between them, sharp, accurate, unavoidable. And in that moment, something shifted completely. Not in her, in him, because she was right. And Dante Moretti, he didn't fear enemies. He didn't fear war. He didn't fear loss. But this loss of control, this need to protect something beyond reason, this refusal to let go, that was something he had never allowed himself before. And now, it was already too late, because it wasn't forming. It had already formed. Fully, completely, dangerously. Obsession. And obsession didn't follow rules, didn't respect logic, didn't care about consequences. It only cared about one thing, keeping what it had claimed, no matter the cost. Dante exhaled slowly. Then he made a decision, not calculated, not strategic, not controlled. A decision that broke every rule he had ever built his empire on. "Everything changes now," he said. Serafina's pulse quickened. "How?" His gaze locked onto hers. Dark, certain, final. "I'm moving you." The words hit instantly, not as relocation, as escalation. "Where?" she asked. A pause. Then, "Somewhere no one can reach you." Her breath caught, because that didn't sound like protection. It sounded like isolation, like removal, like something far more permanent. "And your empire?" she asked quietly. Dante didn't hesitate this time, didn't calculate, didn't reconsider, because the decision had already been made. It adjusts. 2 words, but they carried the weight of everything, because Dante Moretti didn't adjust his empire for anything, ever, until now. And as the silence settled between them, heavy with consequence and something far more dangerous than either of them wanted to name, one truth became impossible to ignore. Dante hadn't just broken his rules. He had just chosen her over everything he had ever built. War did not begin with gunfire. It began with silence breaking in all the wrong places. A shipment that never arrived. A call that was never returned. A territory that suddenly changed hands without permission. And then, the first body. By the time it reached Dante Moretti, it wasn't news. It was confirmation. They've started moving openly. Luca's voice was controlled, but tighter than usual. The report in his hand remained unread. Not because it lacked importance, but because they already knew what it would say. Dante stood at the head of the room, unmoving. Still, too still, because stillness, in men like him, was never calm. It was calculation under pressure. "They're not hiding it anymore," Luca continued. 3 factions have aligned. Temporary but coordinated. Temporary alliances, the most dangerous kind, because they weren't built on trust. They were built on urgency. And urgency meant one thing. Something had forced them to act. Dante didn't need to ask what. He already knew. Her, Serafina Vale, the variable that had turned quiet tension into open war. "They've identified her," Luca said. Dante's jaw tightened slightly, not in surprise, in confirmation. "How much do they know?" he asked. "Enough." The word hung heavy, because in their world, enough didn't mean everything. It meant sufficient to act, sufficient to destroy. And internally, Dante asked. Luca hesitated, just for a second, but it was enough. Not everyone is holding, he admitted. That was worse, because enemies attacking from the outside could be anticipated, planned for, crushed, but cracks from within, those were unpredictable, unstable, dangerous. Names, Dante said. Luca placed a report down. 2 captains, 1 logistics head, and a pause. Someone closer. The room shifted. Tighter, colder, because betrayal at that level was not coincidence. It was opportunity. And opportunity only appeared when power began to shift. Dante didn't react immediately, but something inside him snapped into place. Because this was no longer just about control. This was about survival. Not his, hers, across the estate. Serafina felt the war before she understood it. The atmosphere had changed. Not subtly, not gradually. Completely. Men moved faster, spoke less, watched more. The tension was no longer hidden. It pressed against every wall, every corridor, every breath. And for the first time, she didn't feel like an outsider observing it. She felt like the center of it. They're fighting because of me. The realization came quietly, but once it did, it refused to leave because everything pointed to it. Every shift, every order, every silence. She wasn't collateral. She wasn't caught in the middle. She was the reason the middle existed. Her chest tightened, not from fear, from understanding. And understanding was far more dangerous. Dante found her before she went looking for him. Of course he did. You shouldn't be here, he said. She stood near the edge of the war room. Maps spread across the table, marked with movement, territory, blood. I think I should, she replied. Her voice was steady, but different, not passive, not uncertain. Something had shifted. Dante saw it immediately. You don't understand what you're looking at, he said. Serafina stepped closer. Her gaze scanned the map, not randomly, not emotionally, but with growing precision. I understand enough, she said quietly. A pause. Then, they're not just attacking you. Dante's eyes narrowed slightly. Explain. She pointed to a section of the map. Here, she said. This isn't strategic. It's disruptive. Another point. And this is pressure, not expansion. She looked up at him. They're not trying to win territory. A beat. They're trying to force a reaction. Silence. Then Dante stepped closer, not out of dominance, out of interest, because she was right. Completely. They're not targeting your empire, she continued. They're targeting your decisions. Her gaze locked onto his. And your decisions revolve around me. The words landed like a truth neither of them could deny. Luca shifted slightly behind them, because this wasn't supposed to happen. She wasn't supposed to see it, understand it, become part of it. But she had. And that changed everything. Dante studied her carefully. You're adapting, he said. Serafina didn't respond immediately, because adaptation wasn't a choice anymore. It was survival. I don't have the luxury of staying the same, she said. The statement was simple, but it carried something deeper, something heavier, because she wasn't the girl who had been handed over anymore. That version of her had ended, and what remained was something far more dangerous. Awareness. They'll keep escalating, she said. Dante nodded once. Yes, because they know you won't let me go. The words were quiet, but absolute. Dante didn't deny it. Couldn't, because at this point, it wasn't strategy. It wasn't control. It was fact. And if they can't take me, she continued, they'll force you to choose. A pause. Her voice dropped slightly. Between me and everything else. The room went still, because that was the war. Not territory, not power. Choice. And Dante Moretti had never been forced to make one like that. Until now. They've already made their decision, Dante said. Serafina held his gaze. Then maybe it's time I make mine. The words shifted something again, not just in him, in the room, because she wasn't reacting anymore. She was thinking, strategizing, becoming. Dante stepped closer, closer than before. You don't get to decide this, he said. Not harsh, but firm. because control. Even now, he wasn't ready to give up. Serafina didn't step back, didn't lower her gaze, because fear, it had changed. You said I was a threat, she said quietly. His jaw tightened. I did. Then let me be one. The words landed heavier than anything before, because they weren't emotional. They were intentional, and intention was power. Dante's expression hardened. You don't understand what that means. Her voice didn't waver. I understand that if I stay like this, protected, hidden, controlled, this war doesn't stop. A pause. It grows. Silence. Because she was right. Again. And Dante, he hated that. Because every truth she uncovered pulled her deeper into something he didn't want her part of. Something he couldn't protect her from forever. Betrayal. War. Him. She's right. The voice came from behind. Luca, reluctant, but honest. They're not going to stop, he said. Not until something changes. Dante didn't respond, because he already knew that. He just refused to accept the implication. Serafina took a slow breath, and for the first time, she felt something she hadn't felt since this began. Not fear, not confusion. Clarity. I was never safe, she said. Her voice was quiet, but steady. Not with my family. A pause. Not with you. The words didn't accuse. They revealed, and that hit harder. Dante's gaze locked onto hers. Sharp, unyielding. You're safer here than anywhere else, he said. Not from what I am, she replied. Silence. Because that was the truth he couldn't protect her from. Her existence, her identity, her importance. It wasn't something that could be hidden forever. It wasn't something that could be contained. It was something that would always draw danger. And now it had drawn war. Serafina exhaled slowly. Then she stepped closer. Not cautiously, not hesitantly, but deliberately. You can't control this anymore, she said. The words were quiet, but final, because she wasn't challenging him. She was stating reality, and reality didn't bend. Even for men like Dante Moretti, his jaw tightened, because she was right, and because, for the first time, he didn't have a way to fix it without losing something. Something he wasn't willing to lose. Her. The room felt heavier now, charged, balanced on something fragile, unstable, because every decision from this point forward would cost something, and no one knew which cost would be greater. Serafina looked at the map one last time, at the territories, the movement, the chaos, all of it spiraling outward from her. I didn't start this, she said quietly. A pause. Her gaze lifted to Dante. But I can end it. The words settled like a spark in dry air. Dangerous, unpredictable, and impossible to ignore. Dante's expression darkened. How? He asked. Not dismissive, not controlling, but cautious, because whatever answer she gave, he already knew he wasn't going to like it. Serafina didn't respond immediately, because the answer, it wasn't simple, it wasn't safe, and it wasn't something anyone in that room would expect. But it was the only one that made sense, the only one that shifted the balance, the only one that ended the war, without destroying everything. Her voice was barely above a whisper when she finally spoke. I stopped being the thing they're fighting over. A pause. Her eyes didn't leave his. And become the thing they can't control. Silence. Heavy. Absolute. Because whatever she was about to do, it wasn't survival anymore. It was sacrifice. And as the realization settled fully into place, one truth became unavoidable. Serafina Vale had just decided to step into the war. And nothing would ever be the same once she did. War reached its breaking point not with chaos, but with convergence. Every faction moved at once, not subtly, not strategically hidden, openly, deliberately, because the time for shadows had ended. Now, it was about dominance. The meeting was inevitable, neutral ground, though nothing about it felt neutral. Armed men lined every edge of the massive hall, tension thick enough to choke on. Eyes watched, calculated, measured, waiting for blood, for betrayal, for power to shift. And at the center of it all, stood Serafina Vale, not behind Dante, not hidden, not protected, but present, visible, intentional. A ripple of unease spread the moment she entered, because this was not expected. The girl who had been whispered about, hunted, protected, now stood in the open like she belonged there, like she had chosen it. Dante stood beside her, not in front, not shielding her. And that alone changed everything, because it told everyone watching one undeniable truth. This was no longer about possession. This was alignment, choice, power shared, not taken. She shouldn't be here. The voice came from across the hall, sharp with disbelief. Serafina didn't react, didn't falter, because fear, it had evolved into something far more dangerous. Control of herself. I should be exactly here, she said. Her voice carried, clear, unshaken, and that silence more than any weapon could. Dante didn't speak, didn't interrupt, because this was hers now. The war, the truth, the outcome, and he had already made his decision. He would not take that from her. A man stepped forward from one of the opposing factions, older, calculated, dangerous in a quieter way. "You're the reason this started," he said. Serafina met his gaze. "No," she replied calmly. "I'm the reason it ends." A murmur rippled through the room. Not agreement. Not yet. But attention. And attention was the first step to power. "You think you can stop this?" Another voice challenged. She didn't hesitate. Yes. Not arrogance. Not desperation. Certainty. Because she finally understood something none of them had fully grasped. This war wasn't about territory. It wasn't about control. It was about her existence. And anything built around a single point could be ended by that same point. "You want me," she said. Her gaze moved across the room. Not avoiding, not yielding. "You've always wanted me." Silence, because no one denied it. "You think I'm leverage," she continued. "A weakness, a tool, a pause." Her voice dropped slightly. "But you're wrong." Dante's gaze shifted to her, not in surprise, in recognition, because he could feel it, the shift, the moment she stepped fully into what she had become. "I'm not the thing you use," she said. The air tightened. "I'm the thing that decides whether any of you walk out of here alive." That changed everything, because power didn't come from threat. It came from belief. And for the first time, they believed her. Bold words. The older man said slowly, "But power isn't claimed by speaking." Serafina's expression didn't change. "No," she agreed. "A beat. It's claimed by truth." And then she broke it open. Everything. The lies. The buried history. The child who disappeared. The war that never ended. The identity they had all tried to erase. Her voice didn't rise. Didn't shake. But every word landed like something inevitable. Something that had waited too long to surface. And once it did, there was no putting it back. "You didn't fight for power," she said. "You fought to bury a mistake." Her gaze sharpened. "And I'm that mistake." Silence fell. Heavy, suffocating. Because truth, real truth, didn't just expose. It destabilized. Everything. Dante watched it unfold, not interfering, not controlling. Because this wasn't his war anymore. It was hers. And she was winning it without force, without violence, with something far more dangerous. Understanding. "They hid me because I could destroy them," she continued. A pause. Her voice softened slightly, but not in the way you think. The room leaned in, waiting, because now they needed to know, not for power, for survival. "I don't destroy by existing," she said. "I destroy by revealing what you've all built on lies." That was the moment, the shift, because war thrived on uncertainty, on enemies, on targets. But she had removed all of that. There was no enemy anymore, only truth, and truth didn't negotiate. Dante stepped forward then, not to take over, but to stand with her, not above, not in front, beside. And that was the final shift, because control had become something else. Influence, not enforced. Chosen, I built my empire on power, Dante said quietly. The room listened, because when he spoke, everything stopped. But power without truth, he continued, is fragile. His gaze moved across the room, sharp, unavoidable. And I don't protect fragile things. A pause. Then, I protect what endures. His hand moved slightly, not touching her, but close enough, intentional. And she does. Silence. Then, something unexpected. Not surrender, not defeat. Acceptance. Because of war, it had nowhere left to go. There was no winning against truth. No advantage in continuing. Only loss. The older man exhaled slowly. This changes everything. Yes, Serafina said. It does. And just like that, the war ended. Not with blood, not with dominance, but with something far more irreversible. Transformation. The factions didn't disappear. The power didn't dissolve. But it shifted, reformed, rewritten, because the structure they had relied on had been broken, and something new had taken its place. Serafina stood in the aftermath, not untouched, not unchanged, but no longer uncertain. She knew who she was now, not the girl they traded, not the secret they buried, not the weapon they feared. Something else, something stronger, someone who chose. Dante stood beside her, still, unmoving, but different, because control had never looked like this before. Not for him, not for anyone. You changed everything, he said quietly. Serafina glanced at him. No, she replied. A pause. I revealed it. Their gazes held, not forced, not bound, but chosen. And that was what made it real, because what had begun as control had become something neither of them had planned, something neither of them could undo, something far more powerful than the empire he had built. Connection, not weakness, not liability, but something that redefined power itself. And for the first time, Dante Moretti didn't want to control it. He wanted to keep it. The hall slowly emptied. The tension dissolved. But something remained, unseen, unspoken, watching, because power, real power, never went unnoticed. And far beyond the world they had just reshaped. Someone else had been paying attention, carefully, patiently, waiting, not for her to fall, but for her to rise. And as Serafina stood in the quiet aftermath of a war she had ended, one final truth settled in. This wasn't the end of her story, because somewhere in the shadows, someone had already decided she was the next thing they intended to challenge.